There's no one-size-fits-all approach to creating a successful fundraising strategy and plan.
People are nervous, right? It's a big deal. We're raising $10 million, even if we're raising $1 or $3 million, depending on the size of the org.
Major gift fundraising is not deadline driven. It really is probably the only type of fundraising, along with planned giving, that is not deadline driven.
AI comes on the scene that's affordable, accessible, that can provide insights and personalization at scale.
That's the first core element of this fundraising engine or funnel, is making sure that the top of your funnel, the beginning of your fundraising process, you are in front of the right people.
What do the people we serve need? And how do we open the door to help them get there?
What happens a lot of times is we get this discomfort or this fear, and our brain tells our body to stop.
We can acquire donors and we can automate everything. And that's where I worry, at least personally, around the perils of AI, that it would remove humans from the interaction.
This is the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast.
Welcome to the Intentional Fundraiser Podcast. Today, we're talking with Martha Schumacher. You may be thinking, I know that name. Yes, you do. Martha was the AFP Global Board Chair in 2019 and 2020, but that's not all. She's a CFRE, an ACFRE, and a member of the Institute of Fundraising. She's an avid, active listener and a philanthropy ambassador, educator, coach, mentor, author, and all-around champion. She's the president of Hazen Consulting and the Hazen Institute for Leadership Training, otherwise known as HILT, creating global strategies to elevate social impact and philanthropy. Martha is a founding member of the International Women in Fundraising and a global advisor to the IWF Purple Mind Shift program. She also serves on the International Rhino Foundation Advisory Board and Development Committee. Martha makes home with her husband, Casey, and their sweet but energetic rescue dogs, Gage and Josie. Martha, welcome to the show.
Tammy, thank you so much. I actually am sitting here shocked that neither Gage nor Josie are in the room at the moment. That's not a common occurrence. So who knows? They may show up any minute now.
And they may let their voices be heard.
Exactly.
It happens.
Tammy, thank you so much for having me on. I can't even begin to thank you.
Well, you have been someone that I've wanted to get onto the podcast for quite some time, and I'm so delighted that today is the day. So when you have a thought leader like Martha in a conversation, you want to go right to the hot topics. And so that is what we're going to do today. I think some of the hot topics right now are around shifting power dynamics. I think another hot topic is trust-based philanthropy and the state of trust in our sector. And of course, inclusive giving, especially in the face of, some of the challenges and rollbacks around DEI and the ripple effect, the amplified effect of some of those decisions. So we're going to open it up, Martha.
Wow. All very just light, light rom-com kind of topics.
Absolutely. So grab your coffee, settle in. Let's dig in, Martha. And let's start talking about trust-based philanthropy. So,
sure.
For any of our listeners who might be newer to the concept, how do you define trust-based philanthropy in practice?
I've thought about it a lot, and I think, and again, I just want to thank you for inviting me to be here and have this conversation. And it's so important. I think especially when I know, the timing of this podcast, someday, months or years from now, if anyone's listening to it, it's a different situation. But where we sit right now, which is in late July of 2025, I think, these turbulent times really do call for a kind of whole new reimagining of not only philanthropy, but really of the nonprofit sector for that matter. And so, with that kind of umbrella statement, I would say that when it comes to trust, the good news is that if you're in an organization where that organization's leadership and their development team and really just the culture in general, we often, of course, talk about culture of philanthropy, but if they're really kind of making trust a high priority, then that trust, and I'm going to just take that for a moment and then bring it back to kind of the bigger picture way that we're, I think, talking about trust-based philanthropy these days. But if you're an organization that's cultivating trust as a priority, amongst not only with your donors, but within your team, with your constituents, et cetera, then you're probably doing better than a lot of other organizations because you're actually prioritizing the fact that people should be able to trust each other, and you should be able to have a community that's built on trust. And again, whether it's donor to development officer, CEO to staff, staff to their constituents, et cetera. So I think just kind of the global comment on trust, I would go there. Coming back, though, to I think the way that we're really using this trust-based philanthropy phrase these days. And of course, Tammy, as ever, I can't wait to hear if you're on the same page with me. And if you're not, I actually welcome that. But, you know, to me these days, the person we're holding up probably as the one that got this all started in many ways is Mackenzie Scott. Is the idea that Mackenzie said, I'm not going to do this the way really anyone else has done it historically. I'm literally going to say, here is this large tranche of funding, you know, this massive kind of resource infusion that I'm going to provide to this organization, that. And as it turns out, I think over, you know, the last few years, I think hundreds of organizations at this point. And I am actually going to wait for it. You know, for those of us who've been at this a long time, wow, wait for it. I'm going to trust that the CEO, that the program team, that the development folks actually know what they're doing, know how to do it. And I'm going to essentially treat them like the adults and the professionals that they are. And I'm going to put my trust in them. And I feel like that was, you know, really kind of the genesis of how this whole concept came out, that I think took maybe a little while for all of us to get our arms around and say, what is this that she's doing? How would we actually characterize it? And, you know, as you can no doubt tell, I love it. I think it's where we need to be going. And I wish more funders and donors, we're just not there yet. You know, very, very few funders and donors, I feel to this day, are necessarily kind of taking her lead. Some are, and I think that's great. But I feel like that's where, you know, kind of the genesis. Now, I want to be fair. There might be a foundation kind of here and there. I think of, you know, MacArthur might be a good example. You know, there are some foundations here and there that have done some of that, but I don't necessarily think they've done it wholesale the way that I feel she really has. You know, she's led the way. She has kind of set the stage. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that her giving, the approach that she took, like unrestricted dollars.
Yes.
No outcome reporting required.
Yes.
It raised the bar on philanthropy, on trust-based philanthropy. And I think, you know, I've had a couple of clients who were fortunate enough to receive those Mackenzie Scott gifts. Yay. I'm so exciting. And I like the response that many of them experienced. So, for example, there was a Meals on Wheels in the southeastern part of the country who received, I believe it was a $5 million unrestricted gift from the Mackenzie Scott.
The word we overuse, right? Transformational, but it was transformational, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, especially relative to the size of their organization. It truly was a transformational gift. And what was interesting, because of course they got the press, there were other wonderful organizations in that community who also received funds as a part of that wave of giving. And what this client, this Meals on Wheels, encountered was they would receive a check in the mail for $5,000, $10,000 from community people with a note. If Mackenzie Scott believes in you, you must be doing something right. Here's an additional unrestricted gift.
I literally just got chills. I am not making this up. I'm sitting here getting chills from that. I love that.
And so I love the example that she set. And, you know, I look forward to, I mean, those gifts have been coming in, the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to when we do see, like, what is the ripple effect of that? Will it actually come back where these organizations who received these transformational unrestricted gifts are reporting back how they use those money, although they're not required to? Like, what was the impact of it?
Yes. Isn't that amazing?
To really to demonstrate and, again, hopefully inspire others to join McKinsey and MacArthur or all these other foundations and individuals who believe in the leadership and trust these organizations who are designed to do good, that they will do what needs to be done with those dollars.
And isn't it amazing how it finally gives some of these CEOs and senior folks and program and development folks a little bit of breathing room, right? A little bit of, a little less of that kind of treadmill, right? Or even kind of hamster wheel of, having to constantly, and it doesn't mean, of course, they're going to keep, pursuing funds. And per your point, it's also going to, inspire and encourage others to give. But I love that. And I think the other key to all of this that I think both you and I are saying is it's about this collaborative process, right? It's about collaboration, because one of the things I just feel like I have to call out, and it's a little bit one of my soapboxes. So if anyone who listens to this has ever heard me talk about anything before, they're going to be like, oh, here she goes again, is that historically there's just been such a, in my opinion, kind of matriarchal, patriarchal relationship between a funder or a donor and the development office. And that doesn't serve anyone. It not only doesn't serve the organization, I can't imagine it's a lot of fun for the donor or funder either to feel that way. So I think it kind of, breaks up that whole model and turns it into something very different.
Yeah, I agreed. Something more like a partnership than that patriarchal kind of approach, which is a great transition into the conversation about power dynamics. So, you often...
Don't you think we could do this entire podcast on power dynamics?
I absolutely do. It's so needed, and it's just so prevalent across the sector, right? And so I talk about this in my new book, Calling All Heroes.
Yay! Yay!
Thank you. I'm so excited about that.
Kudos. So excited. Everybody run out and buy it.
Thank you, Mark.
Or get online and buy it, right? You don't have to run out. You can just get right online.
You can pre-order it. Love it.
Yes.
In fact, we devoted an entire chapter to power dynamics.
Oh, I can't wait to read that, by the way.
It's just such a crucial topic. And, we talk about, donor-centered fundraising and taking care of our donors and partnering in a way. But donor-centered fundraising was never designed to feed into power dynamics. Nowhere did Penelope Burke say, when we are donor-centered, we must do everything our donor said. We must placate them. We have to follow their lead, even when it goes against our mission, our strategic plan. It deviates from the important work that we have set out to do.
Yes. Well, and I guess the other piece I'll say to that is I'm actually a really big proponent of and fan of CCF, of community-centric fundraising. And I think that's part of that pushback on that, and I welcome it. And I think there is plenty of room for that conversation and healthy pushback on that, but then also some healthy pushback on, okay, but, donor centricity still has its place. We may want to be much more thoughtful, intentional, and kind of direct about how we talk about it and what that actually really means when you define it, which I think is where you're going with Penelope, right? But that said, to me, there are a few things, there are many things. And again, can't wait to read your chapter. And so not having read it yet, I will say that the two biggest things that come to mind for me around power dynamics. Now, I don't know that we're even going to go today, although I'm happy to the power dynamics around what happens, for example, with staff or with boards or with, for the moment, right, we're even just focusing on, for example, a major donor. But of course, there's a whole other massive piece around some of the, at times, extremely challenging power dynamics of what happens inside organizations with staff and boards. But for the moment, focusing on donors, the two big things that really come to mind for me, one really has to do largely with the power dynamics around how someone gives, what they want to give to, why they're giving to it, and kind of that conversation that you have with the donors. And then the other one, which I think is frankly, probably far more challenging when you really think about it, even than that first piece. Because to say that first part isn't challenging would not be true. That's challenging too. But is the power dynamics around, some of the things that have happened historically. And unfortunately, I was subject to this when I was in house. Most women I know have been around when you get the kind of, just the standard. I shouldn't say standard. I mean standard from the standpoint of the kind of prototypical, older, usually male donor, younger female development officer, because that's often going to be, who's in that room. And so I'll go first to the slightly easier one, maybe much easier one, which is the first part I was saying about, okay, so let's say it's the good old someone, who's been giving for a while is probably the most obvious example. And they maybe they want to give to something that's going to mean mission creep for you, meaning, they want you. And I'll give a great example that I actually had happen a few years ago with the client. And I won't say who the client is, but they have said that it's okay to kind of share this in a just general way, is that
Sure.
It's an affordable housing group, but they've had certain folks over the years, particularly board members, say, why aren't we also focusing on homelessness? Meaning, why don't we become an organ, so where I'm going. And I think anyone listening gets my point here. And so it's been this constant, I think often good, but sometimes challenging kind of push and pull with certain donors, certain board members around why the focus remains affordable housing and doing everything possible to continue to expand the number of housing units available to people. Whereas there are many other organizations, fantastic ones, whose top priority and really only priority, right, is to stay focused on how do we literally get folks off of the street into, how do we take unhoused people and house them? Those are two different, kind of parts of maybe the same coin, but they're two different sides to that coin. Yes. So so then you get the donor coming in and saying, well, I want to give you, and, in this, I'm going to throw a number out there that's not what the number was, but let's say you have an affordable housing organization that, has a $3, $4, $5 million annual budget, and someone says, well, I'm going to give you $1 million if you, and so again, it's not that isn't part of the wider mix of what is happening in the world and what you want to do for social impact. But the decision was made, and I believe the right decision, that the discussion had to happen with the donor around that's not the right fit, because we will then get into, what many of us call mission creep. So that's really hard. Another one might be where, you're in, like, let's say a capital campaign, and the focus is to raise as much general operating support as possible. And someone comes in with a restrict, and having that conversation. And it feels at times, right, like it kind of flies in the face of this donor centricity around, well, you should be, lifting up and encouraging and saying, yes, 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 please, to any donor or funder that wants to fund you, period. And that having that kind of conversation is kind of the opposite of donor centric. I don't happen to agree with that. I think particularly for those donors who are already extremely engaged, extremely invested, like emotionally as well as financially, it's all interrelated, right? That you can have these conversations. Are they always going to be easy or perfect or comfortable? Not necessarily. So to me, that's one of probably many ways we could be talking about power dynamics with major donors. The second one is just much harder and often is about personal safety and security. And it can often get into a situation where you are, let's say a CEO is having to have a conversation with a board member that might be one of their biggest donors. What I will say to that, because again, I feel like we could, on that situation alone, I feel we could spend the rest of the podcast on, and I know we're not going to, but I will just say in this moment, that situation alone to me is really what, separates the organizations that are leading the way they should be leading, the organizations that aren't. If you are not protecting your people,
right,
really at all costs, then something's off. Your priorities are off. And again, just like I just said, but in many ways blown up even more, I'm not talking about comfortable conversations. I'm not talking about at all. Like, there are many situations where you absolutely run the risk of losing a board member or losing, a donor. Sorry, folks, got to do it. It's just not okay. The most important thing is your people, period.
Martha, over the course of that short statement that you made, that we could unpack and talk for hours about those. So I want to drill down just a little bit into some of the things that you shared. So the first thing is also, I am an absolute advocate and fan of donor-centered fundraising, and I'm an advocate for community-centered fundraising. And that actually is the whole point of the book, Calling All Heroes, combining the best of.
Love it.
Because there's so much richness and validity in both approaches, both models. And let's face it, we're divided enough in our sector. There's so much divisiveness that this is an area where we can really take the best of both, in my opinion, take the best of both models.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
In the scenario that you gave around the organization that was focused on affordable housing, and there is a donor, a foundation, whatever, someone who wants to invest $1 million in the example that you gave, right? Whether the number was accurate or not, but we all get the sense of it. And essentially, that's a third of their budget. That would be a transformational gift.
Right.
But would be restricted to homelessness, helping people who are unhoused get off the streets. So it's mission adjacent. It's not mission core.
Right.
And so those very, very difficult conversations and decisions. Now, of course, community-centered fundraising, one of the principles is that we as nonprofit leaders should say, no, thank you, as you did with this client in this case, but no, thank you. That money, however, could be very well utilized with this organization or this organization. We are adjacent. We have a lot of respect for them. Maybe doing a warm handoff to them or an introduction.
Yes.
And I think that there's so much power in that. I've also, in working with many major donors, I've seen that they love to see collaboration.
Yes.
Yes. And I think that even saying to that donor, and I'm not saying force a collaboration or, gosh, we really didn't have in our strategic plan collaboration until 3 years down the road. Stay true to that.
Yes.
And referring that donor or foundation to that potential partner for them that's in alignment, 100% alignment with what they want to achieve. There's so much integrity in that.
Yes.
And I believe that funder, when the time is right, when their priorities are in alignment with your organization, they'll come back to you because trust is everything.
We're back to trust. And sorry, I did not want to interrupt you. I'm just excited about your saying, because I agree with you 110%. This is such a weird analogy, but it's just kind of fun. When you think about the, Macy's, the story at Christmas, right? About saying
Miracle on 34th.
Miracle at 34th, right? So, we don't have that, but it just, to me, that's kind of the comparison, right? And look at what loyalty that engendered to Macy's. I agree 100%. And I will also, I'm so glad you went there, because I'll give you a PS on this story. That donor who I still know today, and with that organization, work with that person, that donor was the first one to make a plan gift to this organization. And I think it's everything about what you said. I think the respectability, the trust. I think also when you say integrity, which is so important, not only is this an organization that has a lot of integrity, but the leadership has a lot of integrity. So this plan gift, which again, I can't share the amount, but it was one of the biggest gifts, they've ever had committed. Absolutely, this was part of why that happened. No doubt.
Yeah. Amazing. And I think those real life stories really illuminate the point. I love all of the rich experiences that you've had, after being a fundraiser and leading in this sector for so long. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh my gosh, sure.
Let's move on to your second point. We have to take care of our people.
We do.
And of
We
course,
do.
AFP Global has taken a leadership role in helping to develop a fundraiser Bill of Rights. Would you
Yes.
talk about that a bit?
I was past chair in 21-22, so I've been off the board for a few years. But I certainly was involved when we first started talking about this, and I'm very excited about it. I think it makes so much sense because we've had this donor Bill of Rights, for quite a while now. And I think that's right and great. And it was a very good role for AFP to take the lead on creating that. However, I think it took us a while, and I'm more than happy to be one of the people that kind of, that says a mea culpa here today. Like, in many ways, we should have created those at the same time, right? But I don't know that that's kind of where, I think we kind of evolved to a place where we realized, well, and also I'll add, I thought maybe we're part of where you were going to go when you brought up the Fundraiser Bill of Rights, which I'll get back to in a moment, is the study that we were a part of about 5 years ago about the sexual harassment in the, in the nonprofit sector, right?
Go there, Martha.
And so I'm so happy that we decided to, be in a leadership role on that. And so, I just bring that into this Fundraiser Bill of Rights around, well, it just comes back to what you just said. We've got to protect our people. Back in the day when Southwest Airlines was a different kind of airline, sadly, I think they're, maybe not really what they used to be. But in the early days when they were kind of coming in as this upstart and they were a lot of fun. And one of my favorite things is back when you would actually wait online, often on the phone, to get through to an agent. Yeah, those were the days, back sitting on the phone, right? But I bring this up because I think it's such a great example. They were so much fun. They had, whatever voiceover. And I remember at one point, the person, who was on that recording would say, okay, now press 8. And there'd be this pregnant pause. And then he would say, well, nothing's going to happen. But since you're waiting, we just thought that might give you something to do. Thank you for waiting. Where I'm going with all this is that, I think the idea, right, of protecting your people comes back to the Southwest Airlines CEO at that time was regularly being interviewed about what his priorities were, and consistently and forever. And I think he would probably say it to this day was that it's all about his people. Like, in other words, he kind of blew things up by saying, yeah, the customers are really important, which, in our world, we would compare that to donors, although whole other podcast, Tammy, about how donors and customers aren't the same. But my bottom line point here is probably obvious, which is his consistent message to his people and to the general public was, as important as the customers are, my people, my staff come first, because for the customers to get the best possible experience, the staff needs to be well taken care of and want to actually provide that experience, right?
And Martha, you just bringing me to a point. Like, I've long believed that our donor retention challenges are correlated to our staff or our fundraiser retention challenges. Much like
100%, 100%. And, I'm not sure, Tammy, you may have more recent stats than I do. What I would say is that I think we're still, last I saw, which probably was in the last 6 to 9 months, I think we're still at around 21 months as being, the average tenure. I mean, that's just, the misalignment there around how long, the average donor, at least, donor that gives beyond the, second or third gift, right? And then those 2021 months, that doesn't work. So, yeah, absolutely. The only other thing I was just going to say on the Fundraiser Bill of Rights is I just like the idea that when something does occur, right? I mean, and this may be just stating the obvious, but I'll put it out there anyway in case folks maybe weren't thinking about this as much. When something does occur, in many ways, it reminds me of why you have a giving policy, right? Like, when you're able to go back and say, well, here's the reason we can't take that gift, or here's why we're doing this with your gift. It's the same with the Fundraiser Bill of Rights. I'm hoping we will get to a place, it's not going to happen overnight, right? But where CEOs and board members and, whomever else, right, of our stakeholders will know that that document exists. Let's say you're the chief development officer at an organization and something happens. The fact that you can then say, listen, I'm committed to this. This is the Fundraiser Bill of Rights, gives you that tool and gives you that ability, right, to really kind of take it up a notch in terms of professionalizing the idea around fundraisers having those rights.
Yes, agreed. And I really think it's upon us as fundraisers, chief development officers, whatever role we have, that we need to elevate and push that as an important point, because the governance committee, it's not going to be on their radar.
That's right. That's right. No, I agree completely. Love that.
One of the areas that I see the power dynamics play out is when a donor has an outdated perception, a misconception, a stereotype, a bias about those we serve, how we do this work, how people find them. I mean, I'm doing the proverbial air quotes, how they got themselves into this situation, right? Not really having empathy or the knowledge or the awareness of the impact of generational poverty or institutional racism. Yes. All of the factors that result in the circumstances that requires us to have empathy for our friends and neighbors, to do the important mission work that we're doing.
Yes.
And so when they say, and I remember very specifically talking with the donor, and she said to me, she asked the question, she said, which ones are the smart ones? And I paused.
What did you do?
First I'm like 5, 4, 3. I have to calm down my visceral response to that.
Well, and center yourself, right? To be ready to,
Yes,
wow.
Yes. And I said, well, what do you mean? Say more about that, right? Because I want to give the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I jumped to a conclusion. Maybe I'm misjudging the question. And she followed on to say, which of the families that you're serving are milking the system so they don't have to work, so they don't have to, right?
Wow.
Obviously. So, my response was, listen, of the families that we serve, maybe there's 1 or 2% that have learned how to leverage the system in order to survive, to overcome the generational poverty, the institutional racism, as a survival mechanism to just make life, to be able to take care of their families. And maybe there's 1 or 2% that are those people that could pull themselves up by the bootstraps, because that's another misconception, obviously, that we encounter often. I said, but for me, it's the 96, 98% of families in the middle that I get up for every single day. And I'm sure that's why you give too, right? Trying to take
what did she say?
Yeah. She said, interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and in those moments, to one of your brilliant earlier points, Martha, in those moments, you realize who are your people and who are not your people, who are in alignment, who are empathetic, who are respectful, who are giving because they either feel that empathy, they've had a lived experience where they feel related to the mission in some way, that your mission helps complete them, help make sense of their own story, helps them give back to their community to ensure equity and justice and all the good things that we in this sector stand for. And some don't. So when those power dynamics occur, I really think it's upon us to course correct those misconceptions, to speak to power, to use a kind of maybe an overused phrase, but an important concept, to speak in that space. I understand, or help me understand why you feel that way, if you always felt that way. But we need to course correct, even if it means saying, no, thank you. Maybe we're not a match, right? Even if it's losing a gift.
I'm with you about truth to power for sure, all the way. I also would say that it's one of the many things about what we as fundraisers do that the vast majority of the rest of the world doesn't even really know or understand. That's actually a really critically important part of our role, is to educate. What I hope is that any of that landed or penetrated with her. I don't know if it did. I can't speak to that. You may not even know at this point.
Absolutely.
But I also just really appreciate you for handling that the way you did. It sounds like, that kind of taking that moment and kind of, recentering and then being able to respond and try to do your very best to educate. And also, so there's education, and then there's also just kind of reality check, right? To reality check her. Yeah, I think that's wow. And is that example in your book?
It is. Yeah.
So all the more reason people need to buy it. Seriously. Seriously, that's incredible. And unfortunately, even though I gasped and it was real because it was so extreme, it happens probably every day around the world with various donors at any given moment are making comments like that. I am very much a glass full person, but I will also say in this kind of moment, I'm a realist that these are the comments, that happen on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Still.
Absolutely, they do. And to, again, one of your earlier points, in those scenarios, let's just say that it is a younger fundraiser. And that comment comes from, a wealthy, more mature person. So, you kind of stand there in the power dynamic of they're wealthy, they give gifts, we need gifts. They're older. I'm younger. We've got all of that
yes.
dynamic.
Yes.
And so what it takes for us as fundraisers to hold the space, not just for ourselves and our organizations, but for our clients, the respect.
That's right.
And the dignity that our clients deserve.
That's right.
It does take something. And so I think the more that we can equip our fundraisers at every stage of their professional development, to have those conversations, to stand in strength.
To be courageous, right?
To be courageous.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard. It's hard. I think one of the things I love about our fundraising community, and especially when we get together, for whether it's a conference or whatever, is finding that strength and knowing that even in that moment, even though, Tammy, no doubt, I don't want to speak for you, but in some ways you probably felt very alone in that moment in many ways. But, the good news to where I'm going is that you have this community, right? That while they may not physically be standing with you in that moment, they've got your back, right? So I think that's really powerful. The other thing I was going to say to your point about the wealth is the two areas I was going to bring up is, I think poverty tourism is real. And so that's obviously quite disturbing. And then I think the other thing is we're always walking that fine line these days of the kind of virtue signaling part of this, right? And so, everybody gives for different reasons, but I think that's also a hard part too, right? Is where's the line between, for example, being someone who funds affordable housing because truly bringing the word back you used earlier, which is probably if I had to choose my favorite, both word and emotion, it would be empathy. How much are they at the table because of that empathy and because of a certain kind of EI level that they possess? And how much is it so that they can say to whomever, I'm funding this? Now, by the way, we can only go so far on being thought police here. Come on. But, I'm not advocating for that, but you know where I'm going with this. I mean, there is a fine line, and a certain level of kind of consciousness and conscientiousness is really important.
Yeah. So this conversation just really emphasizes the whole point around the important work that we do as fundraisers, the integrity we have to bring to the work, and flies in the face of the often, the idea somehow that fundraising is about just throwing parties and taking people to lunch, right?
Have you ever seen those, those funny posters you can find online where it'll say, here's what your mother thinks you do. Here's what the general here's what you really do. And I think the fundraising one has at least one where, it's a gala and everyone's dressed up and just kind of throwing money at you, so yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about empathy. Let's talk about humility. And the importance of listening. You are the guru of deep listening. Talk to us about that.
Well, so active listening at the end of the day is really is defined by just 3 words, believe it or not. improve mutual understanding. That's what it's about, which, sounds almost simple when I put it that way. Of course it isn't. It takes a lot of work. And for some relationships, it's a lifetime of work. My husband and I have been together almost 39 years. So it's it's right. That's a long commitment to continually try to improve mutual understanding. All joking aside, active listening, I think the good news is I feel like even maybe 20, 25 years ago when I really started in earnest teaching it and presenting on it and pretty much training, I don't know, I think all of my clients over time in some way, shape, or form on active listening, particularly with their donors, but also frankly with staff, with board, et cetera. I think the good news is there at least today seems to be a more sophisticated understanding around the fact that it all kind of comes back to that. I think back when I really was kind of first doing this, I didn't get the sense that necessarily as many people kind of, understood fully, or at least had socialized themselves to the fact that it really does all come back to that. And what I would say, without going into my training in this moment, is just to say to you what I not only, the empathy you mentioned, but what I really do. It's funny you brought up humility, because one of the things that I think makes some of the very best gift officers in the world are those who are most humble and most curious simultaneously. And to me, active listening is a lot about being humble and being curious all at the same time. So yeah, I think any development officer worth their salt. And by the way, so often when I train, we get back to the introvert, extrovert, ambivert, conversation. And I'm actually a big believer that even extroverts like me, of which it's probably pretty obvious I'm an extrovert, can really learn a lot by very consciously every day trying to practice as much as possible, being present, asking a question without thinking about the next question, and just really trying to quiet your mind as much as possible and truly listen to what the other person is saying. And I think the value to that, especially I mentioned earlier, kind of the turbulent times, I think especially right now, we need a lot more of that.
And I love that you brought curiosity up, because that is what opens up the conversation, the dialogue, the learning, and then actually listen, like ask great questions and listen to the responses. Ask a follow-up question.
Exactly. I mean, Tammy, I don't know about you. I think and by the way, like prepping for this, it was so helpful to get your questions, because to me, prompts make all the difference, not only in just being ready and prepared, but also they kind of energize you and they inspire you, right? So I think there are so many things that asking questions can do when you prompt someone in a way that's really well thought out, like you've thought through those questions. You've actually kind of wordsmithed every one of those words. Now, in the moment, of course, when you're doing the asking of a donor, please do not sound scripted, right? You and I know this very well. But, obviously, bottom line here is if you have good questions going in, and to your point, follow-up questions, and show true interest, concern, fascination with, and I think that helps too. I've trained some folks, you've probably been through this many times, where they'll say, well, what if I'm not actually, as interested? Yeah. What if, like I want to know about them, but, and what I always say to that is, I think there's something anyone can find, whether it's a common bond, which is so much the key often, it might be that you both have, a child who's the same age. It might be that even just you've recently been to the same place geographically, it doesn't really matter, but just ways that you can connect. Absolutely. You can find things that, that are of interest. So.
And I think in our role as fundraisers and nonprofit leaders, the common thread that we hopefully can always find is shared beliefs and values.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And there could be spaces where we agree to disagree. And that's fine too. We don't have to agree on everything or have every belief and value. But those that are central to our mission, that's what we center on.
I completely agree. And frankly, I like a good spirited debate. I think as long as, like civil society calls for that, as long as people are being respectful of each other, I like that. I'm not a big fan. When I was in-house at Defenders of Wildlife for 9 years, I didn't want carbon copies of Martha on the team. We had extroverts, we had introverts, we had some people who had, this perspective of, and even to your point, even on that team, not everybody had the exact same take on Defenders of Wildlife, right? And what the programs were and why we were doing that. And that's okay. That's good. That's healthy.
Good. It takes all of us in those diverse points of view and perspectives coming together.
That's right.
Right. I like to say that, the problems that we are aiming to solve are bigger than any one person, any one point of view.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So good. Martha, the time is flying by. I don't want to stop talking with you.
I love spending time with you, Tammy.
Well, as you know, and as our listeners know, at the end of each episode, I like to kind of wrap up with some rapid fire questions to give a little more depth. So if you want to play, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Can't wait.
First question. What's the best fundraising advice you've ever received?
Well, we teased it already a number of times, previewed it. The best thing I ever received was from a CEO many years ago who said, your staff should come before everyone else, even your donors.
Wow. Mic drop.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. Martha, what book do you recommend to our audience and why?
So I know I should answer with a fundraising book. And of course, I'm going to say once again, buy Tammy's book. But I do want to go a little bit further and say that I've now referenced a couple of times kind of, where we are in the world right now, and especially in this country. And so I actually really strongly recommend that anyone listening who hasn't yet read Patriot, to put that at the top of your list. Navalny from Russia, who I think now has become better and better known. I personally believe he was the true definition of a hero. And he literally gave his life to oppose an authoritarian regime. And so the lessons of how he resisted feel relevant. And he was a very inspiring guy. So his book, which he wrote and then his wife put out posthumously, I highly recommend.
Thank you. Amazing. What are the 3 most important traits a successful fundraiser must possess? And you've kind of leaked that a bit as well.
There you go. Well, I love going with, like the same letter starting the words. So I'm doing 3 C's. So collaborator, and you're right. We've already talked quite a bit about collaborating. For me, that's with the team, with other departments, with the board, et cetera. Being curious, also previewed that. This is, to me, the sister to active listening, and really is within active listening, being a great listener and asking great questions built from curiosity. And then the 3rd C is to be compassionate. And I think, we've already talked about humility, and that's another kind of sister relationship. I think compassion and humility really go together nicely. So I think those are all really important traits for being a successful fundraiser.
Amazing. Agreed. What's your favorite fundraising application or tool?
It's super simple. It's the campaign gift chart, right? Oh, good. I love your response to that. I love it. Love it. It makes everything clear for staff and volunteers alike. And it's such a great tool, especially for those who are newer to campaign fundraising. The number of volunteer leaders I've worked with on campaigns who, because they've had that just simple 1-page chart in front of them, felt so much more confident. It's kind of magical. So that's it for me.
Love it. What's your favorite conference and why? And you speak at a lot of conferences, so this is a little bit of a hot water topic.
So do you, my friend. So I should, of course, say ICON, and I really do love that conference. But I'm going to break your rules and name 2. One is ICON. And then the second is that IFC, which is International Fundraising Congress, put on by Resource Alliance in Amsterdam every fall. And then, of course, ICON's in the spring. But, I love IFC. I've been enough now. I think I've presented there 4 or 5 times now. I'm going back this fall. So, hey, spring, ICON, fall, IFC, and of course, this gives me the opportunity to say, come to San Diego for ICON in April.
Yeah. Love it. Mark your calendars. Make a plan.
Yes.
All right. Last question, Martha. Knowing what you know now about fundraising, what advice would you give your younger self just getting started in the profession?
To never forget that everyone you're interacting with, your boss, your staff, your donors, your constituents, are human like you.
Brilliant. And what a great point for us to end on, Martha. Thank you for being here.
Tammy, moi, moi, moi. I'm saying moi out loud because people can't see me doing this, but love you and thank you so very much.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. And I know our listeners got so much. So Martha, it's always great to talk with you. Thanks again for sharing your brilliant insights with us. If you want to learn more about Hazen Consulting, the Hazen Institute for Leadership Training, or maybe connect with Martha on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about any of the resources that we've discussed today, check out the links in the show notes. And thanks for listening to this episode of the Intentional Fundraiser podcast. Keep on transforming your fundraising so you can transform the world.
The Intentional Fundraiser podcast is a Fundraising Transformed original. I'm Trent Thompson, executive producer, CMO, and head of community at Fundraising Transformed and the Modern Institute for Charitable Giving. The Intentional Fundraiser podcast has been recognized by FeedSpot as one of the top 80 fundraising podcasts on the web. This recognition means so much to us, and it wouldn't be possible without your incredible support, encouragement, and thoughtful engagement. Every listen, share, and conversation has helped us grow and reach more passionate fundraisers like you. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to review and rate it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen. For resources mentioned in this episode and to subscribe to our Scaling Major Gifts newsletter, visit fundraisingtransformed.com.